An artist transplants his life into his work.
The things that I try to deal with in my work are those very essential things. For me, it's been a lot about death.
Speed painting with a surprise ending.
I consider myself an artist. I went to art school, but I'm also an entertainer. I consider myself an entertainer more.
And Houston's own Merry Pranksters celebrate more than 30 years together.
We think that humor, comedy, absurdity, laughter are very important reactions.
I'm Ernie Manous, and it's time to get art's InSight. Welcome to Arts Insight at the Houston Museum of African American Culture. Right now, the museum is hosting an exhibition of art and cultural artifacts from the Kinsey Collection. It's part of the museum's celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, and it's full of astonishing objects. We'll have a look at the collection in just a moment. First up, we meet artist Michael Bice, who fills his graphite drawings with autobiographical references.
My work is influenced by the impulses behind literature and film, which is to say, telling a story. I suppose that's just a product of the fact that those were my influences when I was a child. I was obsessed with Disney, and I wanted to be an animator. I was raised in a very fundamentally religious family. The iconography of that, Jesus, these images from the Bible, all of those things were really, really powerful for me. But I never felt an inclination to believe in it. When I was 23 and in undergrad, my dad died really suddenly of heart disease. I started making images over and over of my dad, and it was a way to deal with it. I think I went back to the place that was always important to me, telling stories, and specifically telling stories about my life. For me, it's been a lot about death, because that has been something that has just been present in my life. From my dad dying to my sort of constant attempts to forestall my own death. I was born with a cardiac condition called hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. It's a gradual and progressive stiffening of your heart muscle, so that eventually it just becomes larger and larger and less contractile, and it just sort of ends up stopping. My senior year in high school, I had my first open heart surgery. So I had a pacemaker for 7 years, and then eventually my heart failure, progressed, and the pacemaker was no longer, effectively treating that condition. I came in for a regular appointment, and the doctor told me, "Don't leave yet, we may have a heart for you." And so my then girlfriend, my now wife, Adrian, we were there together, and so they put us in a room, and the next day I had a heart transplant. So the first drawing I made was based very directly off of a photograph that my wife took. And it was an image of me in the bed, still unconscious, with the breathing tube in my throat and everything connected to me. That first drawing reminded me a lot of like the films of David Cronenberg. There's this fusion of technology and organic matter. So that one drawing sort of set the tone for how I would approach the rest of the work. First of all, I sort of see the image in my head, what I would like it to be. It's something that I would envision in a movie or something I would come up with in my own mind while reading a novel. I start gathering and collecting photographic sources that I think I can build an image from. And then sometimes I will draw it from looking at an object. So there's a combination of approaches and source materials that go into building each drawing. But even though I plan the drawing out in a lot of detail, it never quite ends up becoming the thing you imagine. What I try to do in the drawings is use really basic drawing techniques. Cross-hatching, stippling, shading. I like to imagine that anybody could make the drawing if they had enough patience and time. One of the images that I took when I was in the hospital was of a collage that I found in the hallway of the transplant unit. And basically they look like children's collages from like a kindergarten class or something. And they'll say encouraging things, like this one says, "Go team, go." And it had pictures of all the transplant doctors. So I thought that that thing was a real condensation of the whole experience, the futility of trying to be encouraging when in fact you have no control over what's happening with your body. The waiting room in Methodist has this large cabinet, and inside this cabinet are these ceramic reproductions of wildlife, eagles, geese, tigers, and they all look really predatory, you know? There's this feeling of something terrible impending. It's a really, really uncomfortable environment for someone waiting to hear if their loved one is going to live or die. So that's another place where I thought that genre and real experience could come together and create something for the audience that they could enjoy, but also understand the emotion. There's always that moment when you go into surgery, when you're in the bed and they're about to wheel you off, and you say goodbye to whoever's there, and you don't know if you're gonna come back. As I was making the drawing, I was trying to find a way to sort of cobble together all my family members into an image. I took an image of all my family gathered together that was taken when I was married. It actually includes myself in the image, and it has my wife in her wedding dress and the rest of my family sort of in wedding clothes. That drawing is about the possibility at that moment of not surviving it, or the possibility of a future in which you get married. There are really some universal emotions or themes that transcend sex, race, culture. When you really burrow down and you start talking about things like death, sickness, love, relationships, the things that I try to deal with in my work are those very essential things.
You can find out more about Michael at michaelbice.com. Welcome to the Houston Museum of African American Culture, which is hosting an exhibit, African American Treasures from the Kinsey Collection. Here to share some of the highlights of the exhibit is the museum CEO, John Guess. Hello, John.
Hi, Ernie. How are you doing?
I guess the first place to start is, who are the Kinseys?
Well, the Kinseys originally are from Florida, went to Florida A&M, but they're now in California. And they're a couple that started to discover their history. They were art collectors before, but when they started to look for their own history, they then found relatives, descendants, and then they started to look at the periods within which their descendants lived. And that took them to a broader collection that we see now exhibited as a history of African Americans in general, and not just their family.
So what are some of the things here that catch your eye?
Well, as far as the artifacts are concerned, there are a couple. One is the baptismal record from 1590s and a marriage record that actually are the first documentation of the African American presence in America, and that's here. The other one that really caught my eye was Confederate money. And it startled me, you know, when people would say, oh, this wasn't fought about slavery. On the money, you have depictions of African Americans picking cotton, essentially saying this money is backed by the labor of these people. And that was astonishing to me to see. The Kinseys, Bernard Kinsey, they trace their DNA back to Africa. And you'll see a rock there from Goree Island, which is where on the coast African slaves were put on boats, or Africans who were enslaved were put on boats and sent to America. They found their DNA, found out he was from Senegal, and grabbed a rock from there. And it's part of this collection. They really talk about the African American aesthetic genius. And here they have wonderful examples. Probably a couple of my favorites. I'm a huge fan of Huey Lee Smith. His pieces always depicted isolation and existentialism. He was a product of the Cold War, and so part of that was there. And from my standpoint, part of the inner city, that we stood isolated from what was going on. There is a local artist, Lionel Lofton, who's in the collection along with John Biggers. Lionel's piece is a piece of a man and a woman embracing, and I love that piece because of the love that it shows within our community that sometimes isn't depicted, especially in popular media.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming by.
The exhibition runs through October 26th at the Houston Museum of African American Culture in Midtown. For more information about the exhibit, go to hmaac.org. Up next, the Orange Show celebrates a uniquely Houston spirit. So an up-and-coming Japanese band and sisters, Charamporatan, swung through town. We brought them to the Orange Show to find out what's shaking in Tokyo.
チャランポランタンです。チャランポランタン。チャランポランタン。はい。チャランポランタン。チャランポランタン。これ難しいのかな。あ、本当。
So we are a pair of sisters from Tokyo, and my name is Koharu. I'm 25 and I play the accordion, and next to me is my sister, Momo, who's the vocalist. We've been playing for about 3 years now, but I've been playing accordion since I was younger and, you know, doing my own accordion thing on the side until 3 years ago I invited my sister to join me and we formed the band. It is a rare instrument in Japan, especially the type that I play. It's both sides are buttons. And how I started was when I was 7, I went to a circus performance with my mom. There was an accordion player at the show. I just kind of fell in love and I asked my mom to get me an accordion on the spot.
チャランポランタンの意味は
The meaning might mean
クレイジーガールズ。多分。Maybe. 本当かな?
So the meaning, there's not like an exact translation for the meaning of our band name, but Charamporantan is also, it's sort of like, it's on the beat, Charamporantan. That's one of the reasons why we chose it. And that's sort of how we define ourselves as well. It's hard to place our music in a specific genre. And when we do, we sort of say alternative chanson or world music, but it's hard to sort of put everything into one genre. And we sort of just play whatever we feel like. One of the big influences we think is probably movies. You know, like especially old American movies are really popular in Japan as well, and then we get a lot of influences from there. Like in Japan, it's actually Moon River, The Monkey, these kind of songs are really popular, and especially in the genre that we play, sort of a song that everyone kind of knows how to do, and sort of something that you don't have to practice and you just kind of pick it up. We don't know any other duos like us, especially wearing this costume, you know, playing this type of music. It's pretty rare.
他の衣装もあるんですけど、普段
Basically what we do with our costumes is I draw like sort of designs and I give them to my mom and my grandma and they sort of make them. That's how basically how we come up with our costumes.
それで こっちが
When we first started out, actually Momo, her stage presence and everything was not very good. So to sort of distract the viewer's attention from that, we just decided to have her hold this pig, and then it sort of just stuck from there. It's kind of like our lucky charm right now. And it's also made by my mom.
すごい。てかこれ何ここ椅子座ってどうすんだろう。サーカス。
We'd love to like build a circus tent and like travel the world like that with our band, and especially like a place like this would be perfect. You know, we'd love to just travel our band, play music, and travel the world like this.
カバンをなくしたいつの間にか寝ちゃってたわすべて物が消えた残ったのは携帯だけカバンをなくした財布の中の保険証も銀行にも電話残金は前からない夢も消えた希望も消えた何もないわ何もないわ2012年4月2日23時半あの時間に戻れるなら戻らせて
You can find out more about the sisters on their website. Dan Dunn has appeared with everyone from Ellen DeGeneres on The Ellen Show to most recently with the Houston Symphony. His work is part art and part performance, and all adrenaline.
I was upside down on my credit cards trying to pay for kids, 5 children, and we were trying to figure out how we were going to get them to college. My wife, she said, what are we going to do? I said, well, I'm going to rent a mini warehouse, and I've got this idea, and I'm going to throw some paint. I draped it in plastic. I rehearsed for a year and a half, and then I had my first show for 4th of July. And I did Statue of Liberty in a minute and a half, and the crowd just went crazy. I built a webpage, and it attracted the attention of a Las Vegas producer, and he had a show in Atlantic City. So we painted Ray Charles and Lady Liberty every night. 3 months after that, he sent me the video, and I was able to post it on YouTube. We were getting 85,000 views an hour, and it was just insane. All of a sudden, our life was changed, and people were hiring us. We could get 30 to 50 offers a day to play all over the world.
アメリカ人アーティストダンダン
The first year, we did 100 cities in 11 countries. I've got over 150 pieces in my repertoire now from doing the custom, so it keeps me growing all the time. When I do a piece, I get images off the web and I study them. I put them into Photoshop. I make sure they look good this big, and I make sure they look good from the back of the room. Then I take them out, and then I start practicing, and I learn them right side up, and then I learn them upside down, and I memorize the shapes, because I've got to get up on stage and hit everything I need just with the shapes. And then I choreograph it to music for emotional impact. The cool thing about what I do is it's like children looking at clouds. You know, you try to guess what it is, and I try to hide it as long as I can. And you guess and you guess and you guess, and then I show you. It's either what you guessed or it's something different. And if I can surprise you and show you something different, the emotional impact that happens is like electricity, like a magic trick, and goes to the audience. And that's what turns me on. I consider myself an artist. I went to art school, but I'm also an entertainer. I consider myself an entertainer more because I have to be on stage. I have to have nerves of steel up there. I have to have confidence. And I was also a musician for 10 years. I played in a garage band for 10 years. I played guitar. So all of these things being a caricaturist, doing wax on, wax off, 5-minute drawings for events for 30 years. This is kind of the culmination of everything I've been working on my whole life. And I'm just having the time of my life.
You can find out more about Dan Dunn at paintjam.com. The New York Times call Houston artists Michael Galbraith and Jack Messing a cross between Dada and David Letterman. It's a quote that pretty well sums up the absurd and sometimes confusing world of the art guys.
Two gentlemen who call themselves the Art Guys have decided to make a performance out of sitting in a Denny's restaurant for 24 hours. To the untrained observer, these guys are just sitting around at Denny's passing the time for 24 hours.
Jack and I work in a sort of a historical tendency that one might call conceptual performance art. We've always used ourselves as the material. And a lot of the work is temporally based, meaning that it's time-based work, that it exists for a moment in time and then it disappears.
Whatever it is, it's ending at 9:28 this morning at the Denny's at the Katy Freeway and Washington Avenue. Let's hope they have enough money to pick up the check.
For us who work in methodology, never held that much interest to either one of us. Experimentation, trial and error, and all that sort of stuff has always been important to us.
We think that humor, comedy, absurdity, laughter are very important reactions to the world and very, very interesting, even more interesting than sadness or angst.
What art does is, I think, is it shifts our notion of reality, of what we thought that reality was. Suddenly you see an artwork, and then it changes our sense of what that was. The reason that's so important is once you understand the world or you see the world differently, you change the world. And that's a mechanism for survival. For us as a species, once we understand the world, then we can deal with it. For me, it's very, very important. It's not a useless endeavor. So the stuff that is perceived as being absurd and, oh, there's the art guys doing what they're doing, we consider it seriously.
And at the same time that it's intellectual and serious, there's a lot of ineffable qualities to that. There's a lot of intuition that goes into it.
That just means we don't know what we're doing.
Fellow Americans, we're pleased to be here today to officially announce our co-candidacy for co-president of the United States. Any questions? We will now take questions.
We came up with an idea of sponsorship and of fashion and of sort of advertising and all these things putting together.
Well, if the role of an artist, which I think it is to investigate this reality, whatever that is, including culture and how people behave and what have you, certainly I think everyone would agree that some of the things that dominate contemporary culture, marketing, media, money, business.
We try to keep it open-ended. There's a reaction that we have against work that explains itself. If you have a piece of art that is issue-driven, that has a statement to make, it goes there and stops, which is fine. That there's room for all that in the art world. We enjoy the perpetual quality that art has, the open-endedness and the questioning that can continue rather than finalize. Bucket Feet was a project where we wore buckets on our feet and then filled them up in downtown Houston at the various fountains. Reactions that we got were avoidance to engagement. And the funny thing about it is I think that truly the most honest and best engagement with that work came from what would be considered homeless people, people that were on the street already, that perhaps thought of it as, wow, that's a great idea to stay, stay cool.
Like the Suits Project, people advertise, people engage in business, people market themselves or whatever, people get married. And marrying a plant was a way to just think about what is this engagement when people get married. I can't imagine why that piece would be any more controversial than walking around downtown with buckets on your feet. We're not answering anything, we're just questioning what is marriage, what's a tree? Is a tree awake? Is it not? What is our relationship to the world, the environment? If we can't take care of a tree, how can we take care of an environment? Blah, blah, blah. For me, it's very rich, but it's embodied in this succinct little humble, it's just a tree.
We've been working on a piece for the last few years that is sort of a summation of a lot of ideas, and it's called Forever Yours.
We're attempting to sell ourselves, our actual bodies, to a collector in the form of our cremated remains after we die. So far, no one has taken up the piece and collected us. They're bronze urns, they're self-portrait urns of each of us, and they're hollowed out so that the idea is that the collector would buy us now. We'd get the money, we'd go to the Bahamas and have fun now, and after we croak, the collector, they would get the bronze urns immediately, and then they would get the art guys after we're gone.
The ashes thereof.
Yes, and the beauty of that is that a collector could own the artist.
Yeah.
It's like one thing, well, I have.
It's revolutionary.
Here's my Andy Warhol here on my wall, but this collector could say, well,
here are the art guys.
Here are the art guys.
To find out what the Art Guys are up to now, visit theartguys.com. And join us again next week for more insightful profiles of artists in Houston and from around the country. I'm Ernie Manous. Thanks for watching, and have a great week.